So welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is going to be not exactly the easiest podcast for me to talk about, but I wanted to briefly have a brief chat about the current world issue and how filmmakers are struggling. And hopefully I can give my insights on what I've been doing, and hopefully that will in turn help other business owners and other people who are struggling in the global pandemic that we find ourselves in at the moment, and being locked inside and not being able to create and serve our clients that we really want to. So just to give some context, I'm also going to talk about a little bit about my lockdown experience and my kind of last 2 months, so to speak, just to give some context for those of you who will be probably watching this in the future, either after the pandemic or later on in the pandemic, or hopefully when things are back to normal. It's currently the 21st of April 2020, and I'm filming this during a UK lockdown that I believe we have another 2 weeks of at least. No confirmation on when, but there was some brief talks of possibly being able to lift that at some point later on in May. But not going to specifically talk about that in this podcast because I don't want to specifically spread misinformation that may or may not be around. I mainly want to focus on, specifically what I've been dealing with mentally, lockdown wise. And I also think that this is not, as I say, going to be necessarily an easy podcast for me to create, but that doesn't mean I don't think it's not going to be useful. So, the lockdown or the kind of effects of this pandemic was really sort of, for me specifically, really felt and really kind of first came about when around the start of March. Now, I had a couple of days where around, I think it was March 10th, March 11th, something like that, but I still had some stuff going on. I know I got interviewed on the radio on the Tuesday, and then I had a behind the scenes shoot, which was my last shoot before the pandemic, on the Wednesday. And then as things escalated, we were still talking about it. It wasn't a pandemic officially yet, and it wasn't really a very serious issue, but there was some definite changes already in process. So, clients were starting to, it was theoretical whether we'd be able to shoot things, or it was theoretical that we were actually going to be able to move forward with projects, or move forward with meetings, or move forward with things we had planned specifically. So that was kind of a back and forwards, specifically email wise and phone call wise, a bit specifically about how that was really going to be affected. So that was around, March 11th, March 12th, something like that. And as I say, I have one video that I will release on the YouTube channel at some point, probably will hopefully already be out by the time you hear this, about of that behind the scenes shoot with Pav as well. So that was fun, and hopefully we'll be able to get back to some more scheduled video content and that kind of thing, because I would like to go back up to London soon when it can be done safely, of course. And again, I'm not going to, as I say, talk about some of the longer term effects of the pandemic that will be around for the longer period of time. But March for me was pretty rough, I'll be honest, in the respect to mental health wise, and just like feeling kind of bad about the world, and where business was going, and where our business was going, and how it fought. Now, don't get me wrong, I just want to make or premise this by saying that by no means am I in a struggling position, or by no means am I in a bad position. Some of my friends have been affected by COVID, and some of them have actually had it. And I personally, as far as I'm aware, of course, we don't know because there isn't any testing happening, but I haven't had it. None of my family members have had it. But for definite, I can say that no one close to me has died for a direct cause of the pandemic, or of the possible knock-on effects as of today. Anyway, so for me, it was still difficult and still hit me hard. I think that I think that's going to be very true for a lot of businesses and a lot of people in the creative space right now. And I think it's also very important to understand that that's okay. And it I think pushed me into I was in a creative rut, or really a not mentally strong place for I would probably say a good couple of weeks to, close to a month or so. I mean, it wasn't, specifically depression or anything like that. It was more just like, there's these very strong roadblocks in the way for me wanting to be able to pursue what I want to pursue, and it was very difficult for me to actually do so. So in that, I still struggling with that a little bit now, and we're a month ahead on, but it's definitely a lot better than it was, specifically in that respect, and specifically having those kind of creative juices flowing and kind of getting into the rhythm of creating content again and working out, specifically what I want to create, how I want to create it, and how I actually want to go about creating it for the better of my brand and my business as well. Now, I'd be very interested to hear, and I am going to, I think, pursue doing some more podcasting stuff moving forward, and I'm possibly going to do some more interview based stuff when it comes to bringing on people who and see how they've been affected by COVID and see if it really is as widespread as I believe it is from the people I've been talking to and the people I've been hearing, because the majority of the videography and the photo community specifically is the main communities of people I'm really going to be talking about, but they are mainly the ones who I can talk to a little bit more closely, because obviously I am part of that community and I talk to people in those communities and have friends who do work in a similar field to me as well, in that respect. So it's definitely been something which I know that everyone in that field specifically, and I'm sure there's others as well, other fields that really have been seriously affected by this, whether that's financially or unfortunately losing, tragically losing or having very complicated issues with someone coming down with COVID in the family. So what have I been doing? How did I get out of that creative rut that I mentioned a little bit earlier? You may be asking. Well, I mean, for me, it was a matter of, well, firstly, let me just backtrack a little bit and let me talk about what my creative rut sort of ended with, or ended up me basically doing. Now, those of you who don't know, as I said, the first podcast, my background's in game development. So, and I did run a gaming channel for 8 years or so, 8 9 years, something like that. So, I had. Specifically, I really enjoy gaming and that kind of thing. So that's what I did for a lot of that month, mainly as a escape and mainly as a way to get away from the global situation for a period of time. But I also think it was something which I needed to really put a dampen on and really put a kind of my foot down a little bit more on, which I think to an extent is understandable about why I specifically went down, that creative rut road. But that doesn't still necessarily mean that I still need to have discipline and be able to get back to quote unquote work in any way, whether that's creating content such as this podcast, or creating blog content, or creating branded content, or trying to develop content through stuff we've shot previously, and etc. like that. So I think that from the gaming kind of rut that I had for about 3 weeks, it basically kind of screwed my sleeping pattern really, really hard. So it was basically where I'd be going to bed probably about 6 a.m., then waking up at like 4 in the afternoon, and then and that was my old sleeping pattern before I had a quote unquote real job anyway. But that's not necessarily a healthy sleeping pattern to have, and it was part of, I think, the cause of why I wasn't able to get as much work done as I would do otherwise normally. So something which I did towards the start of April was to really focus on trying to fix my sleeping pattern. Now, I did ended up fixing it. It's still not exactly fixed now, because it's still something that it goes up and down in respect to, like, oh, you're up playing video games, or you're up working, or you're up doing something, and then you end up sleeping in later, and then eventually it will slip back into that pattern. But I think if you look at your productivity across the day and you are still happy with the amount of work you end up doing, and you sometimes have to push yourself into creating content, or if you have ideas that you're not really feeling, then try to just create, because once you start creating, it will cause a snowball effect. Now, moving on to the start of April or the start of March, now there was definitely a slowdown in the respect to how fast I could put a video together, or how fast I will be putting videos together. And that's just simply because of the lack of, I think, core motivation, because I can't specifically push as hard. And also, it kind of goes hand in hand with the finance end of it as well, which I'm not really going to cover too much, I don't think, in this podcast. But I think that the main thing that I've been looking at, and I wrote a blog post about this, that will be going out next week as of the time of recording this. You know, the main thing I was really looking at, and have been looking at through most of this month, and will be for the rest of lockdown, and have really been looking at before lockdown was even a thing anyway, was how can I add as much value to those other businesses as possible? How can I really, help show them why they should be investing in video? Not always necessarily looking for making money, but how can I really help them and help their business flourish in any way that I possibly can? And I think that the main thing for me that I found is the lockdown, or the pandemic, for any means, has basically forced me into a situation where I have to think more on my feet, and I have to really, I've been saying for a long time, oh, I should be diversifying the amount of income sources I have, or having other revenue streams and this and that. And they were things I started to work on, and was starting to work towards this year. But it's really come into more forefront, really come into more of a forefront mindset of really saying, I think most businesses now will really look to, especially when things start opening back up, and those businesses will go back to work, so to speak. They'll be really looking for other ways and other things that they can make profit from, because I think that if you're solely reliant on, in my case specifically, client work, or you're solely reliant on footfall, or you're slowly reliant on a specific one source, you can be very vulnerable when as a business, and as a person, because eventually everyone has to pay their bills, everyone has to have money to buy food and etc. To be able to live in life in general. So I think that a lot of people should really look at the possibility of developing other revenue streams, and how do you how do you make that product or those revenue streams valuable? And also, how can you develop more quote unquote passive revenue streams? Now, I will probably do some more content talking about passive revenue streams, but passive revenue streams, there's been a lot of talk about them, especially lately. But it's, a lot of people believe that it's not, oh, it's passive, so you don't have to do anything. It's passive in the respect to, once you put in time, they should generate you revenue without you having to do any other work. So, for example, stock footage would be one, affiliate programs would be another, a form of advertising where you get commission, and other forms, and then producing digital products that you can then have on a store, that you can then have exist, and then you can have there are ways to quote unquote monetize an audience, or monetize a quote unquote fan base. But it's also, in some ways, you could also have the merch, you want to do clothing lines, and specifically branding in that respect. So the possibilities are very endless in the respect to what you could do with passive revenue streams, and developing those other forms of revenue. And I think that something which I will be possibly looking to help my clients with coming out of this will be, one, to future proof their content, in the respect to, whenever we do shoot a piece of content, let's look at how we can make the most of that content. And also, do we have contingency content in place if there is a situation like a pandemic, or like this, or like that, where we can't create content? Are we specifically trying to, how much content we trying to release? How much content could we release? Are we necessarily looking at the content that we're producing, and are we doing it in a less optimal way? Where we're not sacrificing quality, but we could say, get out of 4 hours of filming, could we get 3 high quality videos from that, instead of specifically, one of probably the same quality? How do we work more effectively? How can they also create content? How can I help them streamline that process as well? I think that a lot of the reasons why a lot of the clients I have, and hopefully a lot of the clients that I will still have after this will come back to me and will continually come back to me, is because I do my best to try and make it as effortless from their side as possible. I try and do a lot of the heavy lifting when it comes to, oh, let's look at your market, let's look at, who's your target audience, what specifically audience wise are you looking to build? Do you know? Okay, if you don't, let's work out what works. Okay, if you don't know, let's try things, let's see what works, let's see what doesn't, whether that's through me creating something for you, or them just seeing what bits of content could work for them. Unfortunately, there's no way around it. They are going to have to put in some effort, of course, but I can help streamline that process, and hopefully streamline the ways to even create content, even if you're in a lockdown situation or even in a lockdown pandemic situation, because there is a lot you can do and there is a lot you can be doing just with some assistance and some knowledge from someone like myself, whether that's necessarily editing help specifically, because I think that's where mostly the weaknesses, or the more weaker side of it will be the fact that not a lot of people who aren't in the video space will necessarily know how to edit cohesively and be able to cut something together that makes specific cohesive sense, and also cuts out a lot of the things they probably wouldn't necessarily want to be out there, or not necessarily like there's anything bad with that, because I think that if you cut too many ums and ahs and such out, it takes some of the genuineness out of the content, because it feels a little bit too polished. Because I think that when you have a conversation with someone normally, and I think something, this is specifically something I think I'm going to try and do when it comes to content anyway, from my own personal brand side, I'm going to start, or wanting to start, recording, or recording some of the content that all the conversations that I have with clients, with friends, with people that I talk about, because there might be a situation where I've talked about this before as well, where I specifically nail something in just a general conversation with someone, and I think it would be very useful for me to have that audio or that video for me to then use for a branding content perspective. But also, I think for having different bits of content that are specifically tailored around what you're trying to do and specific messages, because you might find there's little gems that you wouldn't have otherwise. Because if you were in a situation where you weren't going not out of your way, but you weren't trying to passively generate your own content on things you would just do normally, then I think you'll find that from a client perspective, you're going to find a lot harder of a job to actually have high quality, consistent content come out, because you're not going to be capturing as much. So, there's going to be a lot that's going to be left on the cutting room floor. And of course, private conversations will have to stay private and will, of course, stay private. But I think that, if you're clear, and if you're concise, and if you are, happy to specifically look to building content platforms and building, different revenue, different kinds of content specifically that work hand in hand, oh, I'm going to make a piece of audio content that introduces the concept of passive income, for example. Then I'm going to do a small video series going into more deep depth on passive income. And then I can do a follow-up post on a written post talking about why you should be doing passive income in the first place. How I've already sort of briefly talked about that here, but there will of course be some crossover with that. But I think it's very important for people to diversify the kind of content they're doing as well, because it also gives people's audiences or customers or clients a time and a kind of breather to see, where you're not just saying, look, I just make videos, or I just make audio, or I just make written, that kind of thing, because there is a lot of benefit to all of the forms of content. And I think that the sooner a lot of people believe and see the benefits of creating content and putting content out there, I think that a lot more people will then do it. And it's more about, I've talked about this before, but it's more about bringing that snowball effect into your business to bring in more revenue. And yeah, it's going to take 6 months. Yeah, it's going to take possibly even a year to before you see anything from content. But the way I see it, at least, the more content you put out there, the faster you're going to see a return. Now, there is, of course, a quite high threshold, or specifically, you're going to have to put in a good amount before you see a return on it. But if you look at the majority of quote unquote successful businesses, they have had campaigns, and they've had, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, sets of campaigns that specifically haven't worked, or specifically have worked, or have brought it has introduced you to the brands which you now use day to day to day. What are you doing from a small business perspective, or what are you doing as a videographer, or what are you doing as a photographer to introduce new people to what you do? What are you doing? What are you proactively doing? Now, for me, I always go out of my way to try and make as many connections as possible and keep those relationships, because I feel that relationships are really important. And of course, that they have to be backed up with you being able to do what you're quote unquote selling, of course. But I think that you know relationships get sometimes not necessarily put as high on the priority list of some businesses' growth as I think they should do. And I think that, moving back to something I briefly talked about in the blog post that I talked about, or wrote, sorry, before this podcast filming, but producing those plans, of really producing those ideas of who is the next person I'm going to, as I grow, where am I going to have to employ, where are my weaker areas of my business. Do I want to spend my entire time doing tax returns, or finance, or working out the email backend, or doing coding for websites, or etc.? Or do I want to try and liaise with another industry, or another person, or another entity to allow me to spend more of my time doing the things that I'm passionate about, and I really want to do, and I think that I'm also really good at. And I think that also, would allow me to really leverage the ability for me to make, at the end of the day, more money as well in a shorter period of time, which I think is what everyone wants, because the more money you can actually make will then give you buffer for things like this specifically. But that has to coincides with you not spending your money specifically stupidly. I could talk, and I'm sure I will do some content about, money management and time management and that kind of thing. But if you can't have it both ways. You need to be careful with how you spend your money. You need to justify what you're spending your money on, because the less money you can get away with spending, then the more money you'll have sat there. And the gap between the amount of money you have, and then you will kind of future proof yourself a little bit more, because then you don't have to take jobs that you don't necessarily want to, or you're not going to be as concerned about finance when it comes to a pandemic like this. And by no means does that mean, that I or anyone I know has millions in the bank. No, of course not. But what it does mean is that, we are better prepared, people who are, saying we as in people who are more better prepared with money, or make, I would argue, better decisions with money. you know is it really necessary I have this subscription to this entertainment platform? Is it really necessary I go on this trip, or this holiday, or buy these jeans, or buy this, whatever it may be? And that's a choice, and that's a decision which you need to make, and you need to choose. I know Gary Vaynerchuk has talked about this a lot. Why do you buy a car which you can't afford? The majority of the time, people will say not because they wanted the car, they wanted to impress X, Y, and Z neighbor, or X and Z, Y colleague, right? And I think that's a very unhealthy, or specifically not the best mindset to really have, because I think that if you are happy within yourself, why do you need to care about what other people think in the same way? Why do you specifically need to care about, oh, that person on the street really, really, really likes the shoes I'm wearing, but they're actually like, they still do, from a basic point of view. I could be wearing shoes that are worth a tenth of the cost. They still do function of shoes, right? but they're not the designer label. So I'm not going to get the head turning, which goes with designer label or designer, clothing in that respect. Now, don't get me wrong, if that's what you want to do and that's where you want to spend your money, and that's, you could quote unquote make a argument to say, as a business choice or a fashion choice, specifically if you're a model, if you're a stylist, if you're this and that, right, then experiencing those things and having those situations, then yeah, of course. But the thing is, you also need to be aware, by making that decision, you're then quote unquote hurting your financial future, possibly. Again, this is talking from a perspective of, you are buying things that are arguably out of your, like, what you can afford. If you can afford buying £300 shoes every week for an entire year, go for it if that's what you want to do, right? But it's about, like, a lot of people, I think, that they want to have this perception of being quote unquote successful, or quote unquote this or quote unquote that, and I think that everyone does. But I think that if you understand that a lot of what can come, and a lot of what success is actually, from my perspective anyway, is being happy and passionate in what you do, and not specifically caring about, oh, such and such doesn't like what I'm doing, or such and such doesn't think that I'm good enough at what I'm doing, or etc. At the end of the day, if it's a technical argument or it's a technical conversation, at the end of the day, if the client has an issue, that's a different conversation, right? But if it's a friend of yours, they're not really paying for the service, or they're, or etc. So I don't really see it in the same way. But I think that that's going to mostly wrap it up for today. I brought a good amount of different topics on, in and around on there. So I hope you guys did enjoy that. I just want to briefly talk about the global situation, and give some insight into how I've been dealing with it, and what I've been doing in the respect to how I've been trying to spend my time productively. By no means is it as productive as it would be as business as usual, but I think that it is better than a large majority, or a majority of people will be at the moment, because I think that quite a lot of people are taking this as a holiday, or a quote unquote holiday, and they are, specifically using that time to relax, which is not necessarily a bad thing. But I think that you need to have a balance between still working, and still, in content creators' case, still being able to create content as well. So thank you for listening, guys, if you got to the end of this, and I hope you took something from it. Let me know what you want to hear, who you would like me to interview, as well, in the comment section down below. And I really should start having drinks when I do these, because my throat just dies. But yeah, stay safe, everyone, and I will hopefully talk to you very soon. I'm probably going to do some more podcasts, as I said, and try to document some more of my more day to day at the moment. So thank you very much, and I'll see you very, very soon.